On September the 22nd, 2021, in Ontario, the vaccine passport was implemented contrary to what Premier Doug Ford had said he was going to do or not going to do. So I wanted to wish everyone a happy Segregation Day on the actual 22nd, but I was embroiled in a jury trial. Now that's done, so today let's take a look at these new laws. Hello, my name is Nicholas Wansbutter. I'm a criminal defense lawyer in Stratford, Ontario, Canada, and welcome to Don't Talk TV. So, in the preamble, I said Happy Segregation Day, and now some people might be unhappy with that, saying that it's a false equivalence to draw a parallel between segregation laws in, say, the United States before the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s and vaccine passports in Ontario 2021. But I would suggest that it's an appropriate comparison. I mean, in some ways, it's not equivalent because at least African Americans had their own water fountain to go to. They had their own entrance to the movie theater. They were still able to go to the movie theater, they just had a separate entrance. They had their own part of the bus, but they were still allowed to ride the bus. Whereas people who don't have a vaccine, for whatever reason, simply don't have access to these things. In that regard, there actually is not an equivalence, but I would submit that there are still parallels, and it's appropriate. I mean, our own premier, back when he was saying that he wasn't going to implement this, said the reason he didn't want to is because he didn't want a divided society. Yet here we are. So today I want to just focus on taking a bit of a look on what exactly are these laws, what are businesses bound to do, and then talk a little bit about possible approaches for the average Canadian Ontario citizen. So the vaccine passport actually isn't under its own law. It's under a regulation added to the Reopening Ontario Act, and I mean, that is such an Orwellian name for an act. Reopening Ontario Flexible Response. I mean, it's the Closing Down Ontario Act. But, I mean, we're basically living in the novel 1984, so we have to expect these laws. So anyway, it's a regulation, and it's under the Schedule 1 for rules at Step 3, because that's the step that we're at according to the Reopening Ontario Act. And if we go down to rules at Step 3, Section 2 Sub 1 is an interesting one. This is before we get to the vaccine passports, but it says that the person responsible for a business or organization that is open shall ensure that the business or organization operates in accordance with all applicable laws, including the Occupational Health and Safety Act and the regulations made under it. Now, this is an interesting provision because all applicable laws would certainly include the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The Charter of Rights and Freedoms has not been abolished, so there might be an interesting defense for businesses who refuse to discriminate to say that they have a defense of necessity because they're trying to abide by other applicable laws, being the Charter. Or Occupational Health and Safety Act, there's some interesting ones under there. Not so much for vaccine passport, but under Section 28 Sub 3, this applies to vaccine mandates in the workplace. A worker is not required to participate in a prescribed medical surveillance program unless the worker consents to do so. So, I mean, that would suggest that PCR testing or even rapid antigen testing is prohibited by Section 28 Sub 3 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act unless the worker gives permission. Back to the vaccine passport. This is under Section 2.1. Says that the person responsible for a business or an organization described in subsection 2 that is open shall require each patron who enters an area of the premises of the business or organization that is described at the point of entry, proof of identification and of being fully vaccinated against COVID-19. So then they lay out the areas. So we've got the indoor areas of restaurants, bars, and other food or drink establishments where dense facilities are not provided, but specifically not with respect to takeout and delivery service. So you can still do the drive-through or you can do takeout. Indoor and outdoor areas of drink establishments where dense facilities are provided, including nightclubs, resto clubs, and other similar establishments, but not, again, with respect to takeout and delivery. Indoor areas of meeting and event spaces, including conference centers. So that's one that doesn't get talked about in the news much, but I mean, that's going to capture an awful lot of places. Places used for sports or recreational fitness activities, so your gyms, casinos, bingo halls, other gaming establishments, concert venues, theaters and cinemas, bathhouses, sex clubs and strip clubs, racehorse tracks, car tracks, and other similar venues, but specifically the indoor areas. So I don't know if you'd be allowed to sit in the outdoor stands and just don't go in the indoor area, and the indoor areas where commercial film and television production takes place, where there's a studio audience. So that's interesting, where there's a studio audience. So, you know, the people who tell us that this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, the ones who essentially forced Premier Ford into implementing this, as long as they don't have a studio present, they're not bound by this. Now, there are some interesting exceptions here if you're going to use the washroom, if you're just going to access the outdoor area and walking through an indoor area to get to the outdoor area, making a retail purchase, picking up an order, paying for an order, purchasing admission, or something that may be necessary for purpose of health and safety. Those are all exempt from the vaccine passport. Now let's just take a quick look at what the possible penalties are under Reopening Ontario Act. A person who fails to comply with these orders, an individual can get a fine of not more than $100,000, $100,000 maximum. Director or officer of a corporation, maximum $500,000, and a corporation itself can get a maximum $10 million fine. So there's some pretty heavy fines here, and you know, they're trying to scare people with these really heavy maximum fines. One thing to keep in mind is that maximum fines are reserved for the worst offenders in the worst set of circumstances. So the absolutely most egregious violation of the laws is what the maximum be reserved for. Now, these laws are so new, and something like this has never ever happened in Canada before, so I really have no sense or idea of what a small family-run business might face if they decline to discriminate, someone complains about them, bylaw or police actually respond, and then they actually get charged without getting a warning first. I don't know what kind of fine they might be looking at. We can just see what the maximums are. Keep in mind that these cases wouldn't be in court for possibly years. So it's really unclear. We're in uncharted territory here, and these things are going to be challenged. The JCCF has issued a final warning to the Ontario government saying that they're going to bring a charter challenge. So in the meantime, what can people do? Well, I would suggest that people can donate to the JCCF to help with making that charter challenge happen, and hopefully a court will do the right thing and completely throw these out. I think I've demonstrated in episode 51 my views on the illegality or the impropriety of these orders, so hopefully some of those arguments could be brought to bear, and I'm sure there's a lot more information could be brought to bear, and especially medical evidence. But in terms of the individual, what can you do? I think there's a couple of approaches. One is to simply boycott any business that implements the vaccine passport. I mean, the government is telling you you're not allowed to go there anyway, so you can obey the law, and that's going to have an impact as well, because when businesses are suffering, they'll go to the government asking them to rescind this law. I would very strongly recommend against being rude, being belligerent, protesting businesses, and the reason I suggest that is because the owners of these businesses most likely aren't even there. So who you're giving a hard time to is 17, 18, 19-year-old people, younger people working a part-time job, especially in restaurants, just trying to get by. I mean, they didn't make these decisions. You're just making their lives miserable. It's not going to change anything. And it just gives fodder for the media to say, oh, look, these anti-vaxxers are all crazy, evil people, and they should be, they deserve no rights. You could attend an establishment and be polite and respectful and see what they do, but just be ready to be turned away. And I mean, restaurants, in fairness, are in a very difficult position given the hefty fines that they could get hit with if they don't abide with this. Although, if the vast majority of restaurants and other businesses refuse to check for vaccine passports, this whole regime would end very quickly. So this video isn't legal advice. If you need legal advice, contact a lawyer. You can call another lawyer or myself. My 1-855 number and my website are listed below, and we can book an appointment to have a consultation to give some actual advice tailored to the specifics of your situation. If there's topics you'd like to see me cover, please consider sending an email to the email listed below, or leave a comment in the comment section, and I'll do my best to do a video on that topic. And if you found this video at all interesting, helpful, or informative, please consider liking, sharing, subscribing, following us on social media, and also keep in mind that whichever venue you're viewing this on, Don't Talk TV is available also on Odyssey, Rumble, and YouTube.